What's up, beautiful people? Today we're going to be checking out a video by Sean Fu. Hopefully I called the name correctly, but this one is titled "The Dollar is Done." And for some time now, I've been telling you about de-dollarization. I even showed you a video of the members of the BRICS nation trying to facilitate the use of national currencies. And some people still think this is not going to affect the dollar. Well, today we're going to hear what Sean Fu has to say about it. So let's get to it.
So pride comes before a fall, and now America faces its greatest challenge. BRICS has now become a force that can't be ignored, and America's most powerful weapon, the US dollar, is now under threat. The reserve currency could be dethroned in the years and decades to come. In a shocking update, BRICS is expanding, with 6 new members about to join the bloc.
True.
And this includes Saudi Arabia, Iran, the UAE, and Argentina. These nations will be joining BRICS from 1st
Ethiopia and Egypt.
January 2024. All the missteps America made are now converging together. From the endless money printing to all the economic sanctions, the effects are now boomeranging back. And it's no longer a matter if the dollar gets taken down, but a matter of when. And collectively, BRICS represents more than 40% of the global population and over a quarter of global GDP. And when you add in 6 new members such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Argentina, you get a bloc that effectively controls the world economy. And here's what South Africa's President Ramaphosa said: BRICS is an equal partnership of countries that have differing views but a shared vision for a better world. But pay attention to his next phrase. We have consensus on the first phase of this expansion process. BRICS isn't going to stop at 11 members. If this trend continues, we'll see more emerging markets joining and eclipsing the Western world. And I don't think the G7 can sanction every emerging market on planet Earth. America, of course, is starting to sweat bullets, and they're sending their very best. They're sending their brightest to defend the established world order. Biden himself will be attending the G20 summit in India, while Kamala Harris is heading to Southeast Asia. And at the heart of this is a rush to defend the US dollar. If the system is destroyed, America will lose the exorbitant privilege and their economy could slow to a crawl. And let's understand one fundamental question. Why are there so many countries looking to join BRICS? Well, it's because the events over the last 2 years have been a brutal wake-up call. Let's recap what happened. Now, the first was the Federal Reserve hiking interest rates, raising it from near zero to over 5%. And because the world is addicted to dollars, almost every country suffered currency devaluations. Even amongst the BRICS members, except for Brazil, their currencies have been crashing against the dollar. The South African rand, for example, dropped by as much as 10%. And this means higher import costs and higher domestic inflation back home. But the real shock to the world was the sanctions imposed on Russia. The G7 has imposed more than 10,000 sanctions, and this includes cutting it away from the SWIFT system as well as freezing their national assets. And it is not a small amount. At least 100 billion of Russian state assets have been immobilized, and this is money that they might never see again. So the sanctions were unprecedented. And
there are even reports that EU is proposing they send the money to Ukraine, Russia's money that is being sent to Ukraine to help develop Ukraine. Do you think that's a good idea? This morning we saw the Ethiopian president calling these sanctions illegitimate. So not just members of the BRICS, other leaders are also seeing this as illegitimate. And that's why they're navigating towards BRICS.
Really made the Global South ask themselves, would we be the one targeted next? If they can do that to Russia, will it be my turn tomorrow? And what we are seeing today is a backlash against the established order. But to break away, the BRICS have to expand and build up their economic strength. Since 2020, the bloc has already overtaken the G7 in terms of global GDP. Their GDP contribution is heading up, while the West is heading down. And with these new 6 members, BRICS is now hammering the nails into the coffin. And let's understand the agenda. In order to challenge the West, in order to break the dollar system, you need to control global demand and supply. It's a David and Goliath battle, but every Superman has their own kryptonite. And for BRICS, this means expanding the bloc to include the biggest commodity producers and consumers in the world. And realize that the US dollar is just a piece of paper or a digit on the screen. It is a medium of exchange that the world all agree that is the most popular, but its value comes from what you can buy with it. What can you get for your dollars? So just imagine if the bloc says one day we don't want to use the dollar anymore. If you want my commodities, my oil and gas and wheat, you have to use our local currency. Maybe it's the yuan, maybe it's the rupee, but the outcome is still the same. And when that happens, the world has no choice but to de-dollarize and do more bilateral trade with the bloc, and that erodes market share away from the reserve currency. The dollar currently sits at 59% of global currency reserves, and that is without a doubt a huge amount. But over time, this is going to drop, and the US
Still
economy will be
declining.
in deep trouble. If fewer countries hold dollars, America can no longer print money from thin air without much consequences. And to challenge that privilege, BRICS is striking deep at the heart of the petrodollar, which is the oil markets. And there's a lot of denial from the West that the dollar can't be challenged. We still have headline after headline laughing at BRICS, saying that the mighty dollar is still secure. But the stage has been set, and now the dollarization is going to accelerate like never before.
That is the important thing. I also mentioned that previously, that it is the advancement that is scary, not the fact that the dollar is going to crash in one day. It's the progress in these steps that is scary. Putin made in a speech in the 15th BRICS summit that they've brought down the use of the dollar to 20% amongst BRICS nations. And this is just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So now imagine that they've added 6 new members, which includes Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Ethiopia. Imagine how scary it's going to get with this reduction of the dollar. Yeah, now people should really pay attention to this de-dollarization. I know everybody's talking about Trump indictments. Also pay attention to de-dollarization.
And there is a reason why the bloc allowed these 6 countries to become full members, right? Especially Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE. It wasn't by accident. It all has to do with cornering the energy markets. And take a look at the biggest oil producers in the world. The majority of the top 10 are now BRICS nations. With the inclusion of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE, BRICS now controls over 40% of global oil production, while the US and Canada accounts for only 25% at best. And that, my friends, is enormous power over the world's energy markets. It is impossible to sanction almost half of the world's energy supply. Price caps just won't work anymore. But that is just on the supply side. By expanding the bloc, BRICS has now also increased their demand power. The BRICS nations account for 5 of the world's top 10 oil consumers. If we combine China, India, Russia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia, they collectively control 30% of global oil demand. So BRICS now has a pricing power for both the supply and the demand side. And this is where things get really dangerous for the dollar, because they control 40% of the supply and 30% of the demand. Now let's do some maths here. They effectively are independent of the West. The BRICS nations can fulfill their own energy demand, but more importantly, they can trade oil amongst themselves outside of the US dollar. And guess what? Modi has essentially written the playbook for this. Just a week ago, India made history by buying oil from the UAE in rupees. They dumped the dollar and bought 1 million barrels of oil outside of the reserve currency. And you can be sure that the rest of BRICS will follow this example and start buying oil from each other in local currencies as well. They will use the Chinese yuan, they will use the Saudi rial, they use the rupee, everything but the dollar. And this will start slowly at first before accelerating and taking the entire United States by surprise. And I think the defining moment, the tipping point, the straw that broke the camel's back that drove this expansion was when President Biden, he vowed consequences for Saudi Arabia. Biden wanted MBS to pump more oil, but the kingdom cut production instead. And that incident probably lit a fire under MBS to find alternatives to the dollar system. And
wait, he vows consequences? I know he's been... wait, you threatened Saudi Arabia?
And that incident probably lit a fire under MBS to find alternatives to the dollar system. And with 6 new members, BRICS can move to dismantle the petrodollar. Every time they buy and they sell oil outside the reserve currency, it weakens the entire system as a whole. And during the summit, Putin told the world that the dollarization is an irreversible process.
Yes, he did say this. In quotes, irreversible. Those were his words. I mean, the English translation. I saw it too. He said irreversible. Yeah, and I flagged that out when we were checking that video out.
And BRICS will be leading the charge, reducing their reliance on the dollar. He specifically said the share of the US dollar in export and import operations within BRICS is declining. Last year, it stood at only 28.7%. So bilateral trade is thriving within the bloc, and it is about to accelerate now that BRICS have grown. And when it comes to taking down the dollar, commodities are key. Once oil starts getting priced outside of the reserve currency, it will shake the foundations of the dollar system, and here's what we mean. The whole basis of the world transacting in dollars came from the petrodollar agreement forged in the 1970s. Saudi Arabia would sell their oil exports only in US dollars, and this gave the dollar enormous demand because it was essentially backed up by oil. And using the dollar proceeds, the kingdom would then recycle their revenue back into US treasuries. They would buy US bonds as part of the agreement, and this agreement made the dollar the world reserve currency and a powerful weapon of the United States. Countries needed to hold dollars because they needed to import oil, and any excess currency they had, they would reinvest them back into US Treasury bonds, lowering the cost of borrowing for America even further. But this system isn't going to hold up for long. It isn't going to hold up forever. The moment Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iran starts pricing their oil in other currencies, the petrodollar system starts to break down. At least within the BRICS, there'll be less incentive to hold a reserve currency, and as bilateral trade continues, there'll be fewer dollars coming in, which means a reduced need to buy US treasuries anymore. And this is where the story goes downhill for the US economy, because the next target would be the treasury market. And if this were a video game, the US bond market would be the final boss. Over the past 50 years, it has grown to a monstrous size. It is over $25 trillion strong, bigger than the entire G7 plus China's own bond markets combined. Together with endless deficit spending, this is why the US economy is so resilient today despite the world entering a global recession. The US Treasury market is so big that it can absorb a ton of investment money, so it vacuums capital away from emerging markets during times of crisis. That's why we keep hearing the mantra that the US dollar and treasuries are safe haven assets, but all that is going to change over time. If global trade in dollars slows down and countries can use their own currency for trade, the BRICS can simply start issuing more bonds in local currencies. It probably won't topple the global treasury market, but it will definitely weaken it. So what does the BRICS expansion mean for America? What does this mean for the dollar's hegemony? And let's touch on the obvious first. Back in April, Marco Rubio made a comment about the decline of the dollar. According to him, there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them. And he's exactly right. As BRICS continue to expand, the threat of sanctions will lose its power. America can't afford to sanction half of the world, especially when that half controls the majority of commodities. And whether it's oil and gas or wheat and gold, the majority is now controlled by the BRICS nations. And if sanctions like price caps are imposed, they'll just ignore it and just trade amongst themselves. They could even divert supply away from the West, and inflation will shoot up in the United States. But the biggest impact on America is losing the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. The US won't be able to borrow cheap money anymore. There will be an actual cost to it. Over the past few decades, borrowing costs have been declining for America. The 10-year yield has been dropping year after year, allowing the US economy to grow faster with cheap money. But as BRICS dismantles the petrodollar, borrowing costs are going to shoot up and level the playing field. It's not that the US bond market will collapse. Yields will be higher. The era of cheap credit is officially over. And the second economic tool America loses is the ability to print money and get away with it scot-free. Because the dollar is the reserve currency and the whole world transacts in it, you can literally print trillions of dollars without hyperinflating your own economy. No other nation in the world can do that. Outside of the United States, there's over $65 trillion worth of debt circulating around. And those are loans in non-US banks and shadow banks, and we haven't even added the dollar reserves in central banks yet. So there's this ocean of dollars around the world that you can dilute. When the Fed prints trillions, every holder of US dollars gets left with the bill. They get a hidden tax, which is inflation. And every time there's a financial crisis, the Fed helicopters drops money into the system. They have done it before in 2008 to bail out the big banks, and again in 2020 during the lockdowns. And it's great for the US economy because it gets first access to the printed money to prop up the economy, right? But not so much for the rest of the world. And this is the deadly cycle that the BRICS nations are trying to break. The current system benefits the few at the expense of the many. The dollar system helps keep the US economy on top of the world while pushing everyone else down. And here's what the president of UAE said about the BRICS expansion. We look forward to a continued commitment of cooperation for the prosperity, dignity, and benefit of all nations. So this expansion is basically an epic backlash against the current system. It is the formation of the rebel alliance against the galactic empire. BRICS has officially split the world order into a multipolar world. And this backlash isn't going to stop. Expansion won't just end with 6 new members. BRICS is going to unite the emerging markets to form a new economic order. Ramaphosa confirmed this during the summit. He told the world, we have consensus on the first phase of this expansion process and other phases will follow.
Yeah.
So BRICS is going to keep growing. And there are many other
I think they said declaration too is coming very soon.
countries like Indonesia on the sidelines waiting. And the more countries join the bloc, the more resilient they become and the less reliant they are on the dollar system. If you sanction one member of the BRICS, they will just continue trading with each other as if nothing ever happened. And according to Bloomberg, the BRICS Plus is going to dominate the world's GDP. If Indonesia joins the bloc and combines forces with Saudi Arabia, we will see them rocket past the G7. By 2050, BRICS Plus will reach almost 50% of global GDP, half of the world's total trade, while the G7 will be well below 20%. The Western economies essentially become a minority player on the global stage. That means the dollarization will accelerate and the decoupling or de-risking of the global financial system will happen. And whether that means a new BRICS currency or just bilateral trade, we won't know for sure. But the global dollar system as we know is finished. We are now in the decline of the global reserve currency and there's no stopping this. America has overreached and the global south is fighting back. So let me know what you think in the comments below.
Yeah, no, that was a very, very good video. The major concern is the next group of countries that are going to be added. That's another concern too, because the peak of the 6 countries is very, very strategic. UAE, Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Egypt, another oil petroleum, another oil state, basically I'm going to call it that. I think Ethiopia is coffee, which a lot of people do not know, but that's also a big market right there. So all those things are very, very, very strategic. We're looking to see the next. I won't be surprised if some of the French colonies that are trying to, should I say, disintegrate from France, I won't be surprised if they'll go to join the BRICS as well. I mean, I'm sure Burkina Faso is already in that line waiting, but maybe Niger with their uranium might want to join the line as well. And you know the other country who has uranium? Russia. Yeah, so this peak is very, very strategic and it's a very big move, very, very big move. The concern why most countries are even going towards BRICS to start with was the sanction. Like, this was not supposed to be a thing. From what I'm hearing, the sanction is not supposed to be weaponized. The currency, pardon me, is not supposed to be weaponized, but it seems like, you know, US has been dashing out sanctions to multiple people. I know the dollarization, the experts still say it's not going to happen anytime soon or it's not going to hurt US in any way, but there's advancement. That's all I can say. I'm not an expert, but all I know is from the news I'm seeing, there's advancement. And a lot of African countries, if not all African countries, are very, very much drawn to the BRICS. We've seen Ethiopia. The president basically made a full speech speaking about the malicious acts of the US. He wasn't mincing words, he wasn't hiding or trying to sugarcoat anything. He spoke about how the West and NATO, I think something about the war in Ukraine. He didn't call Russia. He said the US and NATO in his speech. You can go check it. It's online. I'm not speculating right now. The speech is online. Anyways, that's a video by Sean Fu. I'll put the link to his channel in the description. I watch him quite a lot, so this one I just thought I should bring it to the channel so we can see it together. He makes very good points, and his points always backed up with references, and that's what I like to see. Smash the like button, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a wonderful day. Peace. I made this bed on my own.